There we go. We're all go now. And I'm going to just quickly introduce Oisín before I hand over to him. Oisín is the Surveys and Records Officer with the National Biodiversity Data Centre and is responsible for the management of the Citizen Science Portal and have overseen the delivery of the validation process. He provides active support to recording the networks and to improve the quality and quantity of the data that's submitted to them. And he also leads on the work to develop new surveys to address knowledge gaps. So without further ado, Oisín, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, excellent
stuff.
stuff.
That's perfect. And take it away there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Aoife. So my name is Oisín Duffy. I'm the Surveys and Records Officer with the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and just going to be given a brief introduction to citizen science with the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So I suppose to kick things off, who are we and what we do? Well, the National Biodiversity Data Centre, we work to make biodiversity data and information more freely available in order to better understand and assist the protection of Ireland's biodiversity. So really what that is that we're the National Centre for the collection, collation, management, analysis and dissemination of data on Ireland's biological diversity. So when you break that down, really the collection side of things is actually the records that we're able to get from the recorder networks, so those that are submitted through the Citizen Science Portal. The collation is pulling all those records together, either from the citizen science themselves or from other kind of survey work that's going on with professionals or government bodies. The management of that is actually the kind of the technical side of things, the kind of management and validation processes, and actually keeping everything available. The analysis of that comes from the likes of the monitoring schemes, where analysis can actually be carried out to see how certain species and certain groups of species are doing in the country. And then the dissemination side of things comes from one of our pieces of kind of systematic infrastructure, the mapping portal Biodiversity Maps. And it's worth saying as well that we're also a part of GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So we're the national node for that for Ireland. And basically that means that whenever the records are submitted through our portal, that once they go on to Biodiversity Maps, they're also loaded to this kind of effectively like a global biodiversity data center as well. So I suppose I mentioned there the Citizen Science Portal. That's kind of our main piece of data capturing infrastructure. And the way that works is that records are submitted through the portal itself. So basically there's a whole suite of dedicated recording forms. So no matter what your interest is, if it's ladybirds, if it's actual birds, vascular plants, the marine, whatever the interest is, there's generally a dedicated recording form for it. And you'll see from the recording forms, they look for certain pieces of information, which we'll go on to discuss a little bit later. But you basically fill out the information required and you can submit the record through. So the records can be submitted through both the desktop version, that's what you can see the screen grab of on the right, that's what the recording pages look like themselves. So that's the desktop version. There's also a biodiversity data capture app, which is available on Android and iOS. So that's used for recording in the field. So what we would consider live recording. So you're actually out on a walk and you spot something interesting and you actually there and then use the phone's GPS to actually get your spatial reference and you fill out the information there and then. And that allows you don't have to be kind of worrying about spatial references then when you get back home or anything if you don't know the area well. And I suppose it's just to say as well is that when we're talking about citizen science, it's really kind of any kind of science work that's really kind of carried out by general public. And it might sound like quite thing biological recording. You don't have to have necessarily any training for it or anything like that. And just to kind of give a bit of a brief kind of figure on that, in 2022 there was over 171,000 records submitted through Ireland's Citizen Science Portal. So that kind of number of recording it's a phenomenal level of recording, and as you can see, it's not necessarily as niche as what we might think. So I suppose then the next piece of infrastructure is the mapping portal, which is Biodiversity Maps. So this actually compiles all the biodiversity data from multiple different sources and makes it freely available online. So all the records, they go through a validation and verification process. And only after that point that they will actually end up on biodiversity maps. And obviously, if you can imagine 171,000 records, it can take quite a while to get through those. So it's not instantaneous. As soon as you upload a record, it isn't instantly validated, or it doesn't instantly end up on biodiversity maps. It'll be plotted on our citizen science portal, but only once it goes through the validation process does it go across the biodiversity maps. And that's just so that the information that's up there can be as correct as possible, so that you can be that you rely on the data effectively on that's on there. The data is made freely available to view online and can be used by recorders, academics, policymakers. That's really the hope that people will actually use the data itself. So this is a very quick schematic of how all the data flow actually works. So you have the field recorders, that's the citizen scientists, that's the recorder network over at the left here, and they submit the data either through the online recording forms or the mobile data submission forms, the actual app itself. That goes through to the unvalidated database, which is our citizen science portal. That goes through the data validation process, and the data validation process picks up on just basically see whether the record can be considered correct. So that's everything from checking whether the photograph that is along with the record is of the species that the recorder is saying it is. Sometimes species can be very, very similar. To find out if there's any issues with records, potentially if something is seen well outside its season, if something's only found in the springtime and it's been found at the start of winter, that might kind of raise alarm bells. Similarly, the geographic distribution of the species, if it's well outside what its geographic distribution is, sometimes we have to contact the recorders just to make sure that they're happy with with all the information that was present. So once all that happens, it gets loaded onto biodiversity maps, and then that can go on to basically back to the field recorder so that they can see the data actually going out there, out to GBIF, which is that global kind of biodiversity data center effectively. And then it can go out to other users as well and go on to influence things like planning, conservation management, and the red lists. So that's the red lists are effectively how you find out how species are faring. So whether species are considered least concern, whether they're vulnerable, near threatened, extinct, and things like that. So all this data can be used towards that as well. So biological recording, monitoring schemes and recording initiatives. I suppose if anyone is completely brand new to biological recording, it literally is just recording basically anything that you can find that is, plant life, animal life, fungi, basically anything really. Some groups are easier than others, as we'll see when we're going through. But we at the Centre, we run a number of different monitoring schemes and recording initiatives. There's ones that are available for all different levels of recorders. So from complete beginners, if you have no background doing any of this before, there's recording schemes for you. And also if you're highly skilled, there's also ones that'll interest you as well. So the recording initiatives for a number of different taxonomic groups, and many of the recording initiatives also cover a range of different habitats. So whether you live in an urban area, whether you live near species rich grassland or bogs, there's going to likely be something nearby you that you can kind of get involved with. And just to give a few examples of some of the monitoring schemes and recording initiatives that we do, I suppose the very first thing that people get involved with is what we call casual recording. So that is effectively recording that involves no actual parameters, no set parameters. So you're going out there with just, you could be out in a walk and you're recording anything that you come across, or you're doing a bit of gardening and you see something kind of interesting when you're doing that. And I suppose what no set parameters means is that you're not actually going out and doing anything by a standard methodology. So casual recording includes everything from common to and widespread to rare species. It's kind of a lot of people think that casual recording often just means it's only going to be very common and widespread stuff, but sometimes some of the best finds you get are through casual recording as well. And this can often be one of a singular sighting of a species, which the recorder feels is of importance to actually record. So if people see maybe a bird of prey in their garden, or they see something like a badger or a fox in a nearby field, people will often submit those records. But it's also people as well submitting regular records of just the plant life and the wildflowers that are popping up maybe on the nearest roadside verge or in their back garden and things like that haven't been planted that are actually naturally occurring there. So some recorders will make lists for the local areas, sometimes by taxonomic group, but also across multiple groups. Very often people will get involved with something like plants or birds to begin with, and then they kind of spread out from there. And some people will spend their entire kind of recording career effectively just recording one particular group of species as well. So the number of species recorded is generally dependent on the habitat and then the recorder's own skill level as well. And it's worth saying that when you start out, if you're completely new to it, everything is going to look the same, and it can be quite overwhelming at the start. So everyone does feel like that. So don't worry if you feel overwhelmed at the start with it. Some recorders then will start bringing small bits of almost small bits of methodology into their casual recording as well, where they'll do things like sweep netting or tray beating. And sweep netting is literally just when you go out with a net and you kind of sweep it from side to side as you're going through long grass or long vegetation, and you see what you've picked up then using a thing like a putter or just the kind of investigating what's actually in the net itself. And tray beating's quite similar. You just go to a nearby hedgerow or tree, and you basically have a bit of a tray or a sheet, and you basically just shake the tree gently and see what falls out of it, and then you can identify the species that fall out. So some of the different taxonomic groups to get involved with, again, it doesn't really matter your level of skill. There's going to be, it's whatever you find yourself drawn towards, I suppose. But some of the ones that we find are most popular and heavily recorded groups are birds, vascular plants, moths, butterflies, and then terrestrial mammals. So I suppose birds and plants are always going to be up there. There's an awful lot of recording that goes on for those groups. Probably because plants they don't move around, so that you have something there, you have a target that you can actually go out and find it at any time of the year effectively. And birds are similar, they kind of come into gardens, they might be on your feeders and things like that, and there's quite a lot of them that are very common and widespread and quite distinctive species as well. We're lucky as well that we have a very kind of a good and vibrant moth recording community, so that's why they're up there as well on one of the more heavily recorded groups. And again, then butterflies and terrestrial mammals, the data center runs a monitoring scheme for butterflies, and it's just that they're quite a nice group to get involved with. And terrestrial mammals, it's just one of those things I think people just enjoy seeing, seeing things like hare and stoat and foxes and badgers. So some of the monitoring schemes that we run in the data center, the monitoring scheme considered the gold standard in biological recording. And what's meant by the gold standard is that it's a fixed methodology. So people will be walking this fixed route known as a transect in the cases of the monitoring schemes that we run. And it's done by the same person, generally on either a weekly or a monthly basis. And it's done at the same location over years. So that helps reduce things like recorder bias. It helps, that the recorder knows what species that they're finding in the area. So there's not any issues between recorders, and there's not any issues between sites. It's happening in the same place by the same person over a set amount of time. And one of the ones that's one of our most popular ones is the butterfly monitoring scheme. So it involves walking a fixed route, as I said, known as a transect, every week from April to September. There's also a 5-visit monitoring scheme, and that allows people to get involved without having basically, I suppose, give the time for the full transect, because it is quite a time intensive monitoring scheme, and the fact that you have to do it, try and do it as many weeks as you can from April to September. And what we're finding with the 5-visit monitoring scheme is that it is reflecting the overall trends that are found on the larger butterfly monitoring scheme. There's also a garden butterfly monitoring scheme, which would be perfect for someone that's interested in getting involved but may not have any kind of big experience recording butterflies. You basically just see what's coming into your garden on a 10-minute basis. And again, nothing might fly into your garden, or 1 or 2 species might fly in, and it allows you to do it at a very kind of comfortable and controlled rate. And I suppose the easiest way to take part is to, I suppose, first start off maybe kind of like learning some of the local species that you have, do a bit of casual recording, come along to some of the workshops that might be available later on in the year. And then you can contact the staff that are involved with the actual butterfly monitoring scheme. And again, there are resources and guides online. We have our butterfly swatches, there's online learning courses, there's a new e-course that was launched last year for both the garden butterfly monitoring scheme and the regular scheme. And there's online posters and presentations as well. So the Bumblebee monitoring scheme is very similar, only you walk the transect once a month, and you walk it rather from April to September, you walk it from March to October. There are also flower timed insect counts, so that's the fit counts, and that's basically watching a patch of a particular set of flowers for about 10 minutes and seeing what species come to it. And in fact, you don't even have to know the exact species, you just have to know whether it's a fly, whether it's a beetle, whether it's a bee, whether it's a bumblebee, whether it's a wasp. So it's a really, really nice one for beginners to get involved with. And again, it's usually good to kind of get involved again, learn the casual species that are, do a bit of casual recording and learn the species that are actually in your area first, and then maybe kind of reach out to some of the staff that are involved with the monitoring scheme. Again, there will be the likes of workshops as well that will come up to, kind of give people a bit of an introduction to it. So if it does seem like something you're interested in, do keep an eye out for those. The workshops are going live already, and more of them will be going live throughout the year. And again, there is a Bumblebee swatch as well. They're it's a good way to kind of get your eye in for them. There's online learning courses for those also, and online posters and presentations also. So one of the other, it's not a monitoring scheme, but it's an Atlas project, is the Ladybird Atlas 2025. So this kind of, it allows for casual recording, but it's going towards a kind of an overall larger project. So this is recording species of ladybirds anywhere they're found. Can be done on a completely casual level, or you can go out and kind of do tray beating, sweep netting, all that kind of stuff for it as well. Some people are just sending records that they have nearby their house. Other people are setting out, submitting records that they're actively seeking for them, or going to different habitats to get better coverage for the actual project. And it's a super simple one to get involved with. Ladybirds are a really, really nice group as well. They're generally quite easy to identify. And again, the easiest way to get involved with that is just by submitting the records in through the Ireland Citizen Science portal. And again, we do have a swatch for that. There's a project webpage, and if you submit records to us, you'll also be on the mailing list for the quarterly newsletters. And we'll be kind of covering a little bit more this year on some of the species, some of the new species that are being found, some of the trickier species to identify, and maybe some tips and tricks on how to find things that you wouldn't normally find. And finally, one of the other recording initiatives we have as well is the Spring Flowers project. Again, this is absolutely perfect if you're a beginner or someone that's interested in maybe wildflowers and plants, because it's recording 20 chosen species of spring flower projects, or of spring flowers themselves. So we've chosen these 20 species because they're generally, most of them are quite common and widespread. There are a few slightly trickier ones in there, or ones that are slightly more restricted. And that's just to kind of, I suppose, give people that are maybe been doing this for a while that the kind of added incentive, make it a little bit of a challenge. And again, these are species that are going to be naturally occurring, so it's not going to be the ones that are being planted in your garden and things like that. It's all species that are naturally occurring. So it's the likes of species like bluebell and wood anemone, coltsfoot, primrose, and things like garlic and wild garlic. So we have the Spring Flower project spotter sheets. We also have presentations on it. There's a project webpage, project newsletters, and we're quite active on social media through the hashtag Spring Flowers project as well. And that'll be kind of ramping up even further now as we're getting kind of further into April. It's been fairly shocking weather over the last few weeks, and where there is species out and about and flowering away, it's probably a little bit more enjoyable to take part in once you're when you're actually kind of nice and dry. So how to get involved, what's next? So if you're new to recording, just a few kind of tips. Choose one group to start off with. As I mentioned, wildflowers and birds are a really good starter group. One, with wildflowers in particular, there's a lot of good resources online. The same for birds. There's likely to be some kind of, you might have a local group nearby as well, where there's people that are interested that could actually share knowledge on a kind of a fieldwork basis as well. One thing I would say is don't be daunted by all the species that you don't know. All that comes with time, and that's why it's good to get involved with something like the Spring Flowers project. You're recording species at a time where not everything is in flower, so there's a lot less confusion species around. There's a lot less to be confused about in general. So generally at this time of year, the species that you're looking for, you're generally going to find. If you're using an identification guide, try and use one that's based in Ireland as possible. Go as local as you can for your identification guides, because this will help you rule out a lot of similar species which might not occur here. generally, what they would generally say is that for mainland Europe, the UK has about 70% of what mainland Europe has, and then Ireland has about 70% of what the UK would have. So again, if you're buying something that's wildflowers of Britain and Ireland or wildflowers of northwestern Europe, you might end up having a lot of pages which bear no resemblance on your local habitat. The other thing is that definitely do have fun with it. It shouldn't feel like a chore. Generally, it does add a whole new appreciation and kind of an aspect to nature like that as well. It's nice to be able to go out and actually put a name to things. I think it kind of helps with the connecting better to nature as well if you're actually able to put a name to something. The only one word of warning was that your walks will likely take longer. So if you're out for a half an hour walk at lunchtime, expect that to go up to an hour easily, especially if you're bringing a camera along for identifying things later. So workshops and training. This is a great way to get involved, a really good way to kind of boost your skill level at a very quick rate. So we run a number of workshops and training programs throughout the year, and that helps the recorder network and new recorders learn skills related to biological recording. So the sessions themselves, the first round of workshops is already made live, so that'll be up on our website. Again, you can sign up for a newsletter to find out more about those. And they'll cover introductions to taxonomic groups, more advanced workshops on particular family groups. So that, the likes of maybe certain plant families, like the cabbage families or the pea families, or things like atroplexes. Some of the workshops can be kind of more advanced and some are more beginner intermediate level. And some of them will also cover the survey methodologies that aid with the monitoring schemes and the different record initiatives as well. For instance, there's ones on the Bumblebee monitoring scheme, and there will be one later as well on the Ladybirds as well, and an introduction to the Atlas project. And the workshops and trainings can help improve the level and quality of records as well submitted through the Citizen Science portal. So that's one of the kind of the bits of feedback that's great to see, is that when people go out and they do a workshop, is that they get straight into the field and kind of use the new skills that they gain. Because often what you find is that if you do a workshop in March and you're not getting out into the field by May, you'll end up kind of losing a lot of it. Whereas if you're able to get out straight away and put the knowledge that you've learned over that weekend into action, it generally sticks with you a lot better. And again, you probably heard me mention the whole way through, we talked about swatches and different ID guides. There are further resources on the website. There's a whole host of different freely available online identification resources, different resources for taking part in the monitoring schemes and recording initiatives. And there's also things then like our swatch series, which can be found in our shop. So these are handheld identification cards, and they usually cover a particular taxonomic group. So you can see there we have ones for bumblebees, butterflies, we have ones for trees and shrubs as well. And the trees and shrubs one also comes in Irish. They're ideal for bringing into the field for beginners, but also more experienced recorders, because you will find that you're maybe seeing the same 5 or 6 species all the time. And if you go to a new habitat, you may find something that you've never found before. So it does generally give information on, say, the habitat of the species, the different identification features, and then it also provides images of the actual species as well, so that you can actually see what they should look like when they're in the field. There's ID booklets as well. The ones we have for those at the minute are on an introduction to the grasses, so that's the grass guide, and then bat species that are found in Ireland as well. So these are they're still pocket sized, but they're slightly larger, and kind of for more kind of complex groups where maybe additional information is required. There's a little bit more text involved for the likes of the grasses, and there is a key involved there as well for getting down to the species that you actually have. And then we do have project specific resources as well. So these include kind of the posters, leaflets, different spotter sheets and things like that as well. And again, they're all available online, free to download. So what exactly is a record, and why should I bother? I suppose the whole thing of, why would you bother submitting a record is that you see from the start it goes through the Citizen Science portal. It'll end up in Biodiversity Maps that can go on to kind of be used by everything from policymakers to helping out with kind of conservation measures and things like that. So it is well worthwhile to actually get involved. If you see something interesting, even if you see something common, it's good just to record what's in your area, because you could find that maybe there's not very much recording going on in your area, or you could find that it's a very heavily recorded area. So I suppose biological recording itself, it's very important as it's our really kind of our only means to find out more information about the species, their ecology, habitat preference, and of course the actual distribution itself throughout the country. So submitting records to Citizen Science Portal allows us to continue to update the distribution maps and allows policymakers, researchers, academics and that, and of course the general public to understand more about our biodiversity. So I suppose the pieces of information that you actually need then to submit a record, we have this kind of notion in biological recording of the 4 W's. So that's the who, when, where, and what. And those are the mandatory fields of information that we need to have a valid biological record. If there's anything wrong with those aspects of the record, it generally can't be accepted. So the who is the recorder name, so that's you be yourself when you make the sighting, and then the email address. And again, the email address is needed just in case anyone would need to follow up on the actual record itself. The when is the date of observation, so that's when you actually find the species itself. The where is the location, so that could be the townland, the county, and then also the spatial reference. So if you're using the app, that'll already be generated for you. If you're using the Citizen Science Portal desktop version, there's a map of Ireland that'll come up, you can see on the right hand side, and you can just basically keep clicking in to your local area wherever you find the species and just keep zooming in, and you can drop a pin and that'll automatically put a spatial reference into it. So you don't actually need to technically know the reference as you're making the site, and you can get that later from the Citizen Science Portal itself. And then probably the most important thing of the whole lot as well is the actual species name itself. So that's even if you know what the common name is, that's great. If you know what the scientific name is, that you'll be able to submit the record through regardless what you have. But those are the core pieces of information. Those are the 4 that we actually need for a valid biological record. And you can see from the example here on the right that the information is filled out. So I have my name in there, I have my email address, I have the date of observation, the counties there, the location name, so that's the townland or nearest areas there. The spatial reference has been gained by dropping the pin here. And again, you will find that there are other fields there. There might be non-mandatory fields. You can fill those in if you want, or you can leave them blank. It's completely up to yourself, those. And again, you just need to fill in the species field. And again, the abundance, if it's not relevant to what you're doing, or you don't know what the abundance is, again, that's completely fine. There is an option to include a photo as well down at the bottom right hand corner, and that's very useful for us during the validation process. So kind of a nice clear photo that gets most of the species, particularly if it's a plant, if it's something that's relatively close up. It can be very difficult to kind of validate if there's maybe 5 or 6 species in it, or if it's from very far away, or if maybe the species isn't in flower and there's multiple other kind of vegetation around. So it's really nice to get a good clear photo in for that as well. It really does help with the validation process. And I suppose to say then as well, the actual citizen scientists themselves, the recorder network. So we have a very large and active recorder network. Since our records began, there's been submissions from over 30,000 individual recorders. In 2022, there was over 171,000 records submitted from almost 7,000 individual recorders. And I suppose from one of the things that we've noticed is that a lot of people that are submitting records are submitting one record and then leaving it at that. So over half of the records that we actually receive are just one record. The recorders they just submit the one record and then they don't submit any other that year. But one of the things we found as well is that we have a small cohort of very active recorders. So last year we had 43 recorders that submitted over 1,000 records. And some of those would have submitted literally just 1,000. Some of them would have submitted over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. And even, I think in one case, one recorder submitted over 6,000 records. So I suppose the recorder network as well, it includes members at all different skill levels, from complete beginners to professional ecologists and even national and international experts. So you're kind of joining a nice community of people, and there's lots of kind of nice ways to kind of get involved and kind of get a knowledge exchange going there as well. And I suppose just like citizen science itself, anyone can become a part of a record network. You don't need any formal training. You don't need any background in any kind of scientific discipline. All you have to do is just get out there and submit your sightings, really. And I suppose that's kind of the core to citizen science itself, is just kind of getting out there and getting involved. And that leads us to any questions that people may have for either on the talk or biological recording in general.
Thanks so much, Oisín. That was really, really, really interesting. Like, I've learned so much from that myself. I will be sure to bring my phone with me every time I'm on a walk and start recording things. And I think you're right, my walks are going to get very, very long. Guys, if anyone has any questions, you can put them into the chat if you prefer, or you can ask them you know, over audio if you want to do that. So feel free to do it. I'm just opening up my chat here so that I can see anything. So if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in. You know, Oisín can expand on things or give you a little bit more clarity on anything that he's talked about. Oisín, when did the portal start? Like, when did this all began, that it was, you know, looking for people to contribute and to record?
Well, I suppose the portal as we know it now was around 2015, 2016. That's kind of the new edition of the portal. There was a way to submit records before that, basically from kind of the start of the centre itself. But this kind of the actual citizen science portal we have now has been running from about 2015 to 2016. So so that's kind of I suppose it's easier for us to keep track of the records that are coming in now and all the different taxonomic groups that records are coming in for as well. I suppose the call for records itself, we've always been looking for records to be actually submitted by the Recorder Network and Citizen Science as well. So I suppose, yeah, it won't be long till it's 10 years before this reiteration of the portal is actually up and running.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't see any questions coming in through the chat. Oh, just as I said that, one person has a question. That's great. Marie says, what species are there poor records for? And that might not reflect the actual occurrence, if you know.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the important things to say as well is that whenever you're looking at a distribution map, it's not necessarily exactly where, you know, it doesn't show every instance of where the species is found. That's a really good question, because a lot of times what the distribution maps will show is recorder effort. So recorder effort is basically if there's a good recording community, and say, just make for example, say in Waterford, we'll just say there's an example of a very good kind of cohort of people recording there. Waterford might show that as a hotbed for a certain particular type of species. It might show that there's a lot more records coming in for there than there is for other parts of the country. And really, I suppose all it shows is that there's more people recording that species there. I suppose for species or taxonomic groups that would have poorer records, it's things that are generally things that are generally more difficult to identify would be one of the things. So anything that requires maybe microscope work or requires kind of complex keys. So the actual identification literature will be quite complex. So as you can see, like plants in itself are a really nice example, because plants are one of our most heavily recorded groups, but there are also a lot of species of plants where, you know, that don't have a huge amount of records coming in for due to the level of complexity with them. So I suppose things that like butterflies, moths are generally quite good for recording. Things that wouldn't be as heavily recorded, generally a lot of the times it's maybe there's no national expert for a particular group as well, or there's no active validation. It's difficult to say sometimes where there's poor records coming for. Generally the core groups that we get, the data quality itself is actually quite good. So say something like the ladybirds with the Ladybird Atlas at the minute, we're getting roughly about 97% kind of what you consider accuracy rate after corrections. So there's only about 3% of records that are lost during the validation process. There might be some groups that are, you know, it might be impossible to actually validate on a scale of what we have. But yeah, it's an interesting one to see where records, what particular species would you know, have poor records. I'd say plants would have a higher correction rate than something like ladybirds. Birds would probably have also, plants and birds would also probably have a kind of similar correction rate. But yeah, no, there's definitely groups that are much more difficult. Spiders would be an example of a group where, you know, they're quite common and widespread, but people do have a difficulty identifying them and things like that. Yeah.
There's a comment here from Karina, more a comment rather than a question, but that she didn't have any idea what she's signing up for. And the explanation of the role of citizens in submitting info for biodiversity data. She'd often heard about submitting the info, but thought it was for academics or professionals, and she will definitely be looking up the online learning section, which is great to hear. There's a question here as well, and from Colin. Do you get involved or plan to get involved in giving talks to schools about recording biodiversity data?
With schools, there's kind of there's I think it's heritage in schools. There's a project already run by the Heritage Council with heritage experts in schools. There's quite a few of those that kind of are involved with biodiversity as well, or kind of yeah, I think it's generally kind of biodiversity. There's quite a few people, you know, experts that are involved in that. So it's kind of a different remit, I suppose. Really, there are some schools, you know, you'll get a proactive teacher that's quite interested in maybe getting their kids involved doing something with green schools, or maybe submitting a few records. But it is generally the core group for us. It is kind of like an adult. It is definitely like an adult group of a recorder network. And that's generally because, you know, I suppose just following up with people on records and, you know, having email addresses and things like that. And even some of the identification literature, as soon as you kind of go beyond some of the very basic groups, it does get quite complex quite quickly. But yeah, I think, to be honest, the heritage schools, the biodiversity experts that they would have to go around to the schools probably fills that niche about getting them involved in recording.
Yeah, I think there is a biodiversity in schools initiative that I saw recently. Yes, yeah, and that's through the Heritage Council, and they're doing a lot of work. I suppose I've saw a recent campaign about it online, so it is out there and it's getting into the education system at primary and secondary level. I have a question, Oisín, just kind of, I suppose, around, you know, the recording on peatlands, particularly, you know, ones that are, well, obviously we have special areas of conservation, natural heritage areas, but what do you find is kind of, I suppose, the most recorded maybe group on peatlands, and if there's anywhere, I suppose, from a peatland perspective where you would like the public to maybe start trying to identify or record more?
Yeah, well, I would say that the most heavily recorded groups, I'd say, even regardless of the specific habitat that you're talking about, follows the same trends that we get kind of throughout the year. So the main groups that you're getting recorded, you know, for the same for bogs as it would be probably for a lot of other haps, you are getting your bird records coming in. You are going to obviously get a lot of plant life, you know, plant records, because I suppose plants make up the habitat themselves. So they are the kind of the foundation of the habitat, as it were. So it would be you know, it's unlikely to think that plants wouldn't make up probably the big chunk there. I'd say moths and butterflies would be up there as well. I mean, there is a marsh artillery monitoring scheme. There's some nice kind of moth species that are kind of their habitat preferences boglands as well. So it's butterflies and moths would definitely be in there as well. I suppose for people that are getting involved with their local bog, you have some really kind of nice characteristic species. You have things like sundews. You have some things like sphagnum mosses as well. I mean, the sphagnums are quite difficult to identify. That's one of the things, I suppose, when you're getting into the peatlands, bog habitats, is that there's going to be some species that are super distinctive. You know, you couldn't really mix them up with anything else. And then there's going to be other ones that look very distinctive, but they might have 10 or 15 other species that look virtually identical. And it requires microscope work or hand lenses. or microscope work with someone who's been training doing this for 10, 15 years to kind of clarify it on. But I would say kind of get out there, look for some of the plant life would be a good one. And then again, some of the kind of nice, maybe some of the raptors, some of the birds of prey that you'd be getting. Plant life as an easy one because at least they don't move around on you, and you do have some really kind of nice species there, particularly the sungeas, the droceras, and things like bog rosemary. You will get things like bog asphodel as well, and even things like bog bean. And then on the verges of the habitat, you'll get your orchids as well. So it's plant life is probably one of the easier ones to get involved in, because at least you can go out and what's probably going to be there at least.
Thanks, Oisín. Yeah, like you're right there. The bog never kind of fails to let you down on on the plant species. It's always kind of harder to maybe catch sight of a newt or smaller insects and things like that. But, they're a nice find. Does anyone else have any other questions? Again, you can pop them in the chat, or you feel free to turn yourself off mute and ask questions. Another one here actually from Colin again. Is there an option to submit photos of unidentified marine species on the website for ID by the Biodiversity Centre staff?
Validation side, I suppose it's because even though most of us kind of aren't that far away from a marine habitat, there is definitely a distinct divide. You'll get people that spend all their time recording, and it's purely terrestrial recording. So it is it stops at the dunes, or it stops at the tide line effectively. So the marine side of things, it is a completely different kind of kettle of fish, pardon the pun. And I think that's really why they've allowed for that unidentified side of things, because it can be so alien starting out. It's a beautiful grip, the whole kind of marine side of things. So I think that's why that option has been allowed. So it is a great way to kind of be able to get feedback, and for your records to still be going in. Maybe you don't have a notion of what you're seeing, but you're seeing something interesting, you can submit that, and then the record can be kind of updated by the validator itself. With the scale of the records coming in, I don't know whether that'll be feasible for other groups. If there was a button for unidentified plant, I'd say that then the validation job would probably be a full-time job. And you're roughly probably getting about 30 or 40,000 plants a year as it is anyway. So it might not be feasible for all groups, but it's definitely been tried for the marine at the minute. So it's a nice resource to have.
Okay, so we can take a couple of more questions, and then we can finish up for this evening. And there's a few more that's just come in there. Mary asks, if you submit a mistaken record, are you notified?
No. So what'll happen is, unfortunately, like you can see with the scale, if there's 171,000 records coming in a year, unfortunately, we just don't have the capacity to give feedback on the record level itself. What we do try to do is we try to give feedback through the newsletters, the quarterly newsletters that go out. But you could imagine yourself how much time and kind of resources it would take to get in touch with every incorrect record. So where possible, we do correct records. If you know yourself that you've made an error after submission, you can get in touch. You can just send myself or send the info account an email, and we can take care of that during the validation process. Very often for a smaller group like the Ladybirds, where there's a couple of hundred records maybe coming in during the month, we would be able to make all the corrections. So if someone submitted a 7 spot and they meant to submit a 14 spot, we can update that record yourself. If it's with plants, it's a little bit more time intensive to do all the corrections. But unfortunately, yeah, just with the capacity and the amount of records, we can't give individual feedback on the record level, unfortunately.
Thanks, Oisín.
Yeah.
We've a question here from Fanula as well. As an artist and very interested in bog life and wetlands, are there any opportunities for artists to work with you to develop programs of interest for community members in developing a different perspective in approaching this area of investigation?
Well, I suppose with communities, we do have a link in that we have a data set, and we kind of we allow the distribution maps to go up on our site for the Community Foundation for Ireland. So they kind of will fund community group projects generally related to maybe things like biodiversity action plans, or on a very kind of townland scale, or maybe a kind of a local town scale. For like we ourselves, we wouldn't really have the capacity or resources for projects like that with either artists or kind of groups themselves. But I suppose there would be opportunities with the likes of the Community Foundation, or getting involved maybe with some of the pollinator plan initiatives. So the All Ireland Pollinator Plan is run by colleagues in the data centre as well. And there are some kind of local groups and community groups that maybe you could look about doing something along those lines. I'm not certain in regards, maybe yourself, if you would know more along the lines for the peatlands or the boglands, if there's opportunities there for kind of artist interpretations of things. But for ourselves,
yeah, we see a good bit of artist collaboration with community groups, whether that's looking at biodiversity or archaeology. So yeah, that does happen. We within the Community Wetlands Forum, there's a number of artists that are coming together now to look at those kind of opportunities. So Fanula, if you want to I can send you a message around that to see if you'd be interested in speaking with some of the artists that are already within the Community Wetlands Forum and are working with community groups on the ground. A lot of them, either they're working on like larger projects that are kind of cross community, or are working directly within their own communities. And it kind of varies, I suppose, in obviously what media that they use themselves. So I think within the group of artists within the Wetlands Forum are all coming, I suppose, from kind of different perspectives and using different media. So it might be something worthwhile looking into, Fanula. Yeah, so I'll take one more question, and then I think we might leave it there then for this evening. This one comes from Kevin. This is very, very interesting presentation. He asks, for doing background research on an area, is there an option on Biodiversity Maps to see and download a list of all the species recorded in a particular square?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we do have a reporting function. So when you go on to Biodiversity Maps, you go into the actual, I suppose, the live map of Ireland, into the map section. You'll notice it's the right-hand tab. It says report on it, and you basically get to pick the type of report you want, whether you want it on a 10-kilometer, what we'd call a hectad, or down to 1 kilometer, what we call a monad scale, or you can even do it on, if there's a SAC or an SPA, like a special area conservation or special protected area. You can also draw your own polygon on it. So if there is say for instance, you have a community group and you want to find out exactly what's in your townland boundary, and you know the boundary yourself, you can actually draw that on the mapping portal, and then basically just hit the report button, and it'll download as a CSV, like an Excel file effectively. And you can see all the records that have been submitted for those particular squares or that particular polygon. And again, just to kind of hark back to an earlier question there, just because something isn't shown there doesn't mean that it's not there as well, if you know what I mean. It just might be that it's a poorly recorded square. And the other thing is that something that may have been recorded in the 60s or 70s may not be still there anymore as well. That's the other thing. So it can be interesting to kind of let you see maybe to re-find a few species, or maybe to see what's not there anymore as well. So it's a very kind of useful function, and that's all available completely free on Biodiversity Maps.
Thanks, Oisín. Yeah, I think we will leave it there. Oisín, where can we find, the information for any of the workshops that you're doing? That's all on the Biodiversity Data Centre website, yes?
It is, yeah, it is. Yeah, if you sign up for kind of newsletters as well, the next round of workshops will be announced there as well. The latest bunch just got kind of released there recently, so they'll be on our events page as well. If you go onto the main website and go to the events section there, you'll see all the different. They're selling out. They seem to be selling out quite fast as well. So yeah, there'll hopefully be plenty more throughout the year as well. So they'll be kind of staggered throughout the year. There'll be different announcements for it. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, that's your cue then, everyone, to go and sign up really quickly. You're going to do it straight away after we hang up on this call. As well, with the Community Wetlands Forum are going to have a couple of workshops, I think, on particular species identification coming up in April. So keep an eye out as well for those with my colleague Michal. So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone so much, and thank you so much, Oisín, for taking the time this evening and talking to everyone, and thanks everyone for joining us. The session's recorded, so we will have that available as well up online for you to watch back in case in case you've missed anything or came in late. So it'll be available for you online. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.